a geek. Talking baseball every week. 'Cause they're Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman the Geek, presented by Black Stack Brewing, the friendly neighborhood merch merchants now in a liquor store near you. I'm John Bonus of Twins Daily from Fort Myers, and with me, Aaron Gleeman of The Athletic from Minneapolis, Minnesota.
You don't know that. I could be traveling the world, John.
I do know that. I can see your background.
It's false. Blurred background. He's lying to you people.
It's the same blur as
All right. Well,
every other time.
you don't know that that's my fat blurred cat walking behind me. It
You
could
also,
be anyone's.
you also don't know that when I've been in your place, I haven't seen everything in exactly that blurred vision.
That's true, yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's your default vision. Is just seeing three of something and figuring out the middle one is the
exactly
one you want to see.
Yeah.
I always liked that in cartoons. That was a good trope in cartoons where the guy either the guy's drunk or he gets bonked on the head and he sees three of them and he's got to figure out what the middle one is the real one.
That's right.
Yeah. That's called bonus vision now in my head. So we are a week into camp basically.
Yeah.
And games, we're recording this Friday morning. The first game's tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
First Twins
versus
game
Atlanta. Home versus Atlanta.
And so I thought, as a kind of big picture theme for today's show, because this is our first free show we've done since camp opened,
Correct.
that we would go over the 7 things we've learned, or at least think we've learned, in the 7 days since camp has opened. And today's day 8. Now, I always have a suspicion that there could be news of some kind on day 8. And if there's news on day 8, okay, well, we recorded early. We'll do it on the Patreon side. That's always fine, too. My sneaking suspicion. We'll see if that pays off. Sometimes that's just heartburn and indigestion for me.
Yes,
suspicion.
We've done what? 4 Patreons, I think, since camp opened, something like that. 3 or 4 Patreons.
Yes.
So if you are interested in more frequent updates, we'll just mention patreon.com/Gleeman. Still just $1 an episode, though, in the future here. Apparently, we're going to have to switch to $8 a month. So if you want to get in for $1 an episode right now for a while, you can.
Test
and then
it
in
out,
a month, you test it out. Now is a good time to be doing it. And, of course, you get the back catalog. So you get to hear Monday's show that we did with Betsy Helfand, where we got her take on a lot of stuff, especially on full first names and how important they are. Yeah. And then Wednesday's mailbag, you could get our reaction immediately after the day that pitchers and catchers reported, what our reactions were to that. So it's just a lot more Twins news and a lot more fun.
Yes,
over there, and it's ad free and
true. If my indigestion turns into news, we'll do something about that too. So, John, yesterday you were at camp at Ham Stadium, and you saw something pretty interesting.
Something new, something I think people are going to really like if they are actually at spring training games. Maybe if they're watching on TV, I will be interested to see how much they show of this on TV and how much it comes through on TV.
Right. So it's the automated ball and strike system, ABS. Which they've had increasingly in the minor leagues now for 2 or 3 years, I want to say, something like that.
Right.
It reached AAA, and I think we talked during the season, it was kind of interesting when hitters especially would come up from AAA, which they do, obviously. Prospects come up, injury replacements come up. I remember talking to Royce Lewis about this too. They're immediately, it's not that they're against the automated strike zone or robo umps. It's just that they're put in a weird spot compared to major leaguers because they're having to now bounce back and forth between the automated zone and the entirely human called zone of the major leagues. And you might say, well, isn't the automated zone supposed to just mimic the human zone? Well, I think really what we've kind of seen is that the human zone has morphed into a weird version of the rule zone. Right. And so the ABS system that has been used in the minors now, and as you mentioned, is going to be sort of tested at a larger scale now this year in spring training in half the games or more than half the games,
like
right?
That,
It's the rule book. It is just whatever, someone put in the rule book. And I'm sure that's how umpires were first taught the human zone. But we know every umpire's got their own little zone. And even with the increase in technology and the spotlight that is placed on calls now, like because of we can see incorrect calls immediately if you're watching on TV, and there's accounts on Twitter that just grade umpires the next morning and all that. So I think that has caused umpires to sort of lock back in to what the real zone is, because otherwise they'll just grade poorly. However, the reality is the human zone and the automated zone are not identical in any way. And hitters would come up last year from AAA and say, not that they hated the automated zone, and in fact, we're going to talk in a minute, hitters really seem to like the challenge system, which is what's being instituted in spring training, which you saw yesterday. But I remember Royce Lewis saying, like, I just learned never to swing at a high pitch because the automated zone is not set up to call those. It will just never call them, which is great at AAA. You can really take advantage of, eliminate the top, 10% of the strike zone and just not swing at it. It makes life difficult for a pitcher. But then you get called back up to the majors, or you come off your rehab stint, and all of a sudden those pitches are being called by a human umpire, and then you go, oh, crap. Yeah. Like I have to kind of recalibrate. So what you saw yesterday.
Yeah, and you're in my experience with it is watching it a little bit during COVID, right, where they ended up kind of having, they didn't want umpires going to spring training or the spring training camps, etc. So they would have, a coach basically calling balls and strikes who was there, and then they would use sort of the stat trackings or what's it called, StatCast system to be able to, correct them if they wanted to. And we saw basically kind of a lot of dissatisfaction in general with how that was working, etc. What I saw yesterday was totally different. So here's, first of all, let's explain quickly how it works, right?
Well, so I just want to say, like, what you're saying occurred in the summer of 2020.
Right.
And was not intended, like they hadn't yet instituted the ABS system even in the low minor leagues at that point. What you're describing is basically like a shoddily put together because umpires weren't available because COVID restrictions were in place. So they were doing kind of a abbreviated camp at Target Field, which the media was allowed. No one else was there. And I remember, it would be like a pitching coach would be calling balls and strikes, and the pitcher would be like, that's BS. That was no. And then they'd look at the laptop next to him and go, oh, you're right. It was a strike. Right. Well, 5 years later, basically. It seems crazy that was 5 years ago. But anyway,
I know.
5 years later, now there's an actual system in place where, yes, it's using the same technology, but it's filtering it through the lens of an actual ABS system that can react immediately. And then the challenge system, which was there, which I think the rule is just going to be, correct me if I'm wrong, you get 2 incorrect challenges.
Yeah, basically. So the way it works is from the time that it is called by the umpire, you basically have 2 seconds. I think it's 2, maybe 3 seconds to challenge it. And only 3 people can challenge it, and none of them are the manager. The pitcher can challenge it, the batter can challenge it, or the catcher can challenge it, and that's it. And yes, the deal is that you only have you can, if you get it right, well, then you don't lose it, right? Yeah. But if you get it wrong, you only have 2 the entire game. So the whole team gets 2 the entire game, okay? And so I asked, yesterday's live batting practice in the stadium was the first time they used it, right? Yeah.
And who was the umpire?
It was Michael Kadire, actually, was the umpire, right? And what I saw was very different in terms of the players' attitude towards it. And there was a lot of hooting and hollering. There was a lot of excitement about it. There was a lot of giving each other a hard time about it. Like if you call it and it's, or giving Cuddy a hard time about his call. Like that was also part of it, I think. And what kind of made it fun is how it's displayed, because it has to happen immediately. The challenge has to happen immediately, and almost immediately then you hear an announcement. Ball is called strike. It is being challenged, and within several seconds, up on the scoreboard is the zone and where the ball was, and then it kind of rotates again and then zooms in to see whether or not it was there. So, like for instance, one of them was called a strike, and it was clearly a ball. And lots of people razzing the pitcher or pitcher and Cuddy about it, right? And then another one was called a strike, and it was right on the edge of the zone. And so when they kind of rotate around and then zoom in on it, you see like it caught like an eighth of the baseball. It caught the edge of the zone. And then everybody's giving, I think that one was Harrison Bader a hard time about it, and giving props to, I think it was Enoa that got it right. And so, it was what it drove home was, as much fun as the players were having fun watching it, and they're the ones who are impacted by it. Like they're the ones who have something invested in it. The fans are going to love this. I think they are absolutely going to love the way it rolls out and the experience of those challenges happening. So,
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people obviously saw it with the Saints last year. And the reaction, I heard very few negative thoughts on it from players, from coaches. Falvey talked quite a bit about it because he was getting reports from people week to week about it. And from people watching, like you're saying, fans, like it's so fast because
the speed is important. It's really important. It does not.
It's not like an NFL replay or even MLB traditional replay where it takes 6 minutes and people are driven nuts. I mean, I hate that. I'm a big believer in replay, but I think there should be a cap, like a minute. If you can't definitively figure out what it is in a minute, leave the call. Like, don't change it. That's my thought.
I'm with you.
There's nothing worse than the 7-2 game in the 8th inning. Someone challenges some, safe call, and 4.5 minutes later, the umpires are still trying to figure out what it is. It's like you just waste everyone's time. But the difference with the automated balls and strikes is every pitch is being calculated. And so it's not like there's any extra work that needs to take place to figure it out. The only difference is you're essentially only asking to see pitches that are challenged. Every pitch is called a ball or strike from the automated system. They just keep it to themselves. No one, they let the regular umpire call it until you say. And I also like the idea of, in other sports we've seen like, oh, you're limited to 1.5 or whatever it is. Right. I like the idea that it's very straightforward to me. You can get 2 wrong in a game and then you're done, because the issue with limiting it, and I remember seeing Chris Finch, the Wolves coach, talk about this. It sounds fine to say, hey, you're limited to 2.5 or whatever, 2 per half, I should say, even if you get them right and they're challengeable calls. But that assumes that umpires aren't capable of continuously making the bad call. Right. Like, why should the team or the hitter or the pitcher be punished by an umpire who might make 10 wrong calls? Like, why should you be capped on how often you can kind of fact check them? And so I love the idea of just a set number of wrong calls, because what that means is if you're challenging and you're correct with your challenge, which is to say the umpire's call was incorrect, you can do an infinite number of them. You could challenge every pitch for every game if the umpire is wrong about it. And so I like that there's not a limitation, although, as you're pointing out, the real drama here, because it's not the manager making the challenge call or the challenge attempt. It's the 3 people who are most imminently involved. And, I mean, you see this in basketball all the time. Patrick Beverley, I think I brought this up before, who was a Wolves player for a couple years, a few years ago, and he thought every play should be challenged that he was involved with. Anthony Edwards, largely the same way. He's constantly making the signal of challenge that. And so what the Twins are going to have to learn, and what teams are going to have to learn, is who is a reliable narrator about their own ability to react in real time, because emotions are going to be high. If you're the batter and a pitch is borderline and you think you've just been screwed over, it's going to be very...
And you've got 2 seconds. You don't have time to calm down.
Right. It's going to be very easy to go, just challenge it. I'm sure. Just challenge it.
So I asked,
but you're going to learn very quickly that that pond will dry up, and then you're going to leave your team in a bad spot. If I mean, hell, what if Edward Julian is the leadoff hitter one day, and the first 2 pitches are called strikes, and he thinks he knows the strike zone, which he does pretty well, and he challenges both of them, and they're both actually strikes, and then you're out of challenges. Well, I can tell you that in the dugout, the conversation is going to be, you're no longer got the green light on that.
Like, that's right. Yep.
It's almost like trying to steal bases. you got the green light if you're fast until you get caught a bunch of times in the same week, and then you have a yellow light at that point. So I think that's going to be one of the things that takes adjusting, and it's also, I bet, going to be frustrating to some managers because they don't like not being in control of those type of decisions.
I asked Baldelli specifically about that. Yeah, and yesterday, and basically he came up with three things. The first was today in live batting practice. The point was he wanted the batters to, and maybe the catchers as well, to do some challenges because he just wanted them to get used to the system. Like he wanted them the experience of going through it. So during live batting practice today, he was like, I want them to challenge even if they're not sure sometimes right now. Like here during live batting practice, let's just do it, right? The second thing he said is, we're not implementing this in Major League Baseball this year. So in spring training right now, he's not really putting any boundaries around players on that. It's just wide open. Like if they F it up and Julian does get two pitches in the first two pitches and challenges they're both wrong and nobody else can challenge the rest of the time, well, then that's lesson learned, right? It's spring training. This is what it's for. He wants people to do whatever they want to do in spring training and get a sense for it. And they'll worry about things like boundaries once they get to the point where they're real games, right? And the third thing that he just kind of clarified was probably shouldn't have any challenges by pitchers. That even though the pitchers and the batters and the catchers all have the ability to challenge, what people are seeing from things is that pitchers are by far the worst at challenging because they're not there. They're not at the plate, right? The catcher is on the pitcher's side, and the catcher should be the one who decides whether or not it's a challenge, not the pitcher. And I hadn't thought about that, but that is, in fact, makes perfect sense. The catcher saw where that ball was, and he's also a little more detached, objective. He's probably a little more objective than the pitcher about whether or not that ball was there or not.
Yeah, although I will say a counter to that. The catcher is the one attempting to frame the pitch.
Well, maybe that's true too.
Yeah. So it is a mark for or against them if they're able to trick the umpire's eye.
Yeah, that's true, but they also know whether or not they had to frame the pitch. You know what I mean? Like,
I don't know, because think of it this way, though. I get what they're saying,
and they might not really even be able to frame pitches anymore. Like,
well, that won't go away.
Well,
it just means you can be reversed.
You just get overridden, right?
I would think of it this way, though. The majority of eyes that are watching a pitch across the plate are from the pitcher's point of view. Because when games are on television.
Oh, I guess. Yeah, right.
Right? So I get that. You want to be closer to the action, and the catcher's the one actually receiving it, and the batter's the one that watching it. But the pitcher has a cleaner view than either of them. I mean, the batter's off to the side. So they're probably not the most reliable in terms of probably up and down they can, maybe not. And the catcher is receiving it, but A is, kind of busy at that moment the ball is crossing the plate. Like the pitcher is the only one with a free mind, let's put it that way, when the ball is crossing the plate because they've completed their job. The batter is focusing on, do I have to swing at this? The catcher is focusing on, do I have to catch this and frame it? And so their ability to see whether it's a ball or a strike, I think, would be compromised by the fact that they're busy. The pitcher's not busy. The pitcher's the only one of the four, pitcher, catcher, hitter, umpire, who's done doing their job by the time the ball crosses the plate. And they do have a clean sort of look into it, but also they're probably the most biased, I would say.
Right, exactly right. And they might have thought for 59 feet of the way there that it was going to be a good pitch, and then when it just misses, they're still hanging on to that for those 2 or 3 seconds that they've got to make the call. Here, I'll give you the quote from Rocco. The pitchers are not in a position to do this as well as those other guys. They're just not. It's been proven that's the case. I mean, if Pablo wants to do it, great. If he wants to learn something. But when the time comes, the catchers are going to be the ones that have the best look. They're going to be focused on making a good pitch. The catchers have the plate sitting about 18 inches in front of them, and they can see it with a clear view, which I can't argue with that. So
yes, but again, the catchers are moving, and they're trying to catch something, and there's some other things involved there. But yeah, it's interesting. Like you said, it's not actually coming to major leagues, but I would have to think at the point at which it's been accepted in all of minor leagues, essentially, it's getting pretty good reviews in terms of the challenge system. I mean, I think once you institute it in spring training, assuming it goes reasonably well, because, think if we were having similar discussions about the pitch clock being brought into spring training, and it was, oh my God, this is going to be a big deal. And then 5 days later, it was fine. I would think it's setting up to introduce this full time in Major League Baseball for 2026.
Oh, it absolutely is. Sure.
And so it's one of those things where I almost wish there was a way beyond spring training to get your major leaguers to still sort of mess around with it for 6 months. Because the weird part is the guys who are at AAA are going to be much more equipped next year to accurately challenge or not.
Right.
The guys who spent rather
right.
than the major leaguers who haven't had it in game action other than spring training, which by that point will be a year away, although they'll do it next spring, obviously, too. So, yeah, it's interesting. I think it's not the full-scale adoption of robo-umps that I know many people would like, but the reality is that the technology is just not reliable enough to do that. And that's coming from someone who wants to see that. But I think the challenge system, based on the feedback that it's gotten and really feedback from fans in terms of it, you don't notice it. I mean, it's 5 seconds extra, basically, 3 times a game or something like that. I think that is a good compromise, and it accomplishes most of what you would accomplish from going to robo-umps, and it paves the way to sort of get that overall idea accepted for a while by the old school fans or the people who are against it. They can see how seamless it is. They can see the number of impactful calls that it can overturn, and games that it can change. And then 5 years from now, let's say, if the technology advances at the same rate it has over the last 5 years, maybe you can institute more full scale. I don't think we're ever going to get to the point where there's not a human umpire, because there's a lot involved from like a management of situation level that a human has to do, I think.
Right. I'll also say that I think I'm after watching it, and I was, it was one afternoon of, seeing it a few times. I think people are going to like the drama of how this is set up more than they would like the drama of, just automatic strikes and balls being called on every pitch. Like the fact that it's a quick hit, and the fact that they've got a great display on the scoreboard, and that everybody can kind of watch and go, he did just catch the zone there. Okay, strike.
Right.
Or just missed it. And I wonder just how far in they'll kind of get, like how much, like if any edge of the baseball is just touching the zone, it's going to end up being called a strike. I think fans are going to react to it, and I think, while it's not supposed to be interested in Major League Baseball, I would think that it would not be interested in Major League Baseball just because they've said that. I expect the reaction from spring training games and from TV and such to be from the fans' reactions to be positive enough that there's going to be no stopping it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean this year, but there's going to be no stopping it after this. After everybody gets an idea, gets exposed to it, I think it's going to be people are going to love it.
Here's what will be the roadblock: 2 things. Umpires union,
sure,
and the players union will fight it, even though the players will like it, because they'll fight it because they'll feel like we'll agree to it in exchange for fill in the blank.
Well, maybe
because we've learned that with the pitch clock and some other stuff, and I'm not necessarily blaming the players for taking that perspective, because they get boat raced in every negotiation with the MLB owners, so that's the only leverage they have.
They can get right.
Right. I mean, the MLB owners could try to change the CBA to say every player before they come to the at bat is going to get a kiss from their high school crush, and the players will be like, you know what, we'll agree to that, but only if you raise the minimum salary and you change the option rule. And they're just so conditioned, and I don't blame them for that, because they get whooped every year in negotiations, or every 5 years. But I think those are the only roadblocks. But yeah, ultimately, we've seen it. I know AAA is not the majors. However, AAA is often televised. AAA has 5,000 to 10,000 people often watching it. AAA involves many players who have played in the majors and will play in the majors and are going back and forth within a season from the majors to AAA. And so if they were going to discover a massive flaw in the ABS challenge system, it would have been discovered at some point in the 6-month season at AAA last year. Somebody would have raised an issue that was more so than just the tweak needed, and we wouldn't be seeing it in spring training. I think it's past kind of the test that it needs to pass. Now it's just a matter of literally getting it approved. So yeah, I look forward to it. I mean, I don't know. My stance on umpires has been pretty consistent. I think they're narcs. The personality that wants to go into umpiring is an odd one to me. They're an essential part of the game, and I'm not someone who thinks that every umpire is bad. I actually think they've been forced. The perception is that umpiring has never been worse because it's quantifiable now in real time.
Right.
But the reality is umpiring has never been better.
I agree.
But that just speaks to how flawed the human element is, that this is the best umpiring we've ever gotten. And every game there are 5 calls that could have, gone the other way. So, I'm enthused. But you're right. It's much more in terms of like fun and excitement and just drama. The challenge, saying that call's wrong and then waiting the 5 seconds and then seeing the display, like you said, is so much more interesting from a viewership standpoint than every single call just lighting up on the scoreboard, ball or strike, because there's no reaction to that.
Right.
Like unless like Baldelli's going to come out and like challenge the entire concept of like technology, which I wouldn't put past him. Where he's like, go back to the 1800s, like something like that. Other than that, it's just you live with what is shown. Whereas there's at least the ability to kind of fight back. And I always wonder, and we'll move on to actual Twin stuff here, but I always wonder, like in the NFL, when did replay come in 10 years ago or whatever it was, like fully in the NFL? Maybe longer than that. I don't know.
Yeah, but I don't know either. It seems forever now.
Yeah, it may be longer than that actually. You really learned immediately how many wrong calls there are.
Right. Yeah.
And so I always wondered, like, do the referees and the umpires and stuff ever go like, man, we're bad at this? Because this is going to, I'm sure they see now in baseball, like they look at, umpire scorecard and they actually get graded. Like I'm sure they get emailed from the umpire's office. Like, here was your grade from yesterday, whatever. You were at 92% or something. But even 92% means you missed like 6 calls.
Right.
And so I wonder if this challenge system will really like lay bare how many just random calls are wrong in the course of a baseball game. And like, if that will change the umpire's kind of mentality and be perhaps less willing to start fights over their calls.
Yeah, right.
Or if it will change the player's mentality to be even more kind of skeptical of the umpire's ability.
Can be.
Because now it's like,
but the players are putting their ass on the line too when they're actually challenging these things on a regular basis. Like it's going to be a humbling aspect for both sides. I think both players and umpires on a semi-regular basis, where they're going to be like, there are definitely players who say, "Oh, that umpire was absolutely screwing me," blah blah blah, where the umpire wasn't screwing them. You know what I mean? And the truth is, the umpire does have a better view of it than the player does, probably. He's got that zone right there, and he's got a little more experience calling that stuff. So it'll be.
I don't know what the my like gut reaction would be, and maybe there are numbers on this, I just haven't seen them. I would assume that the majority of challenged balls and strikes, like at AAA last year, were overturned. Because even if you're not like the greatest at figuring it out, you're not going to challenge a true like 50-50 pitch that much.
There's a selection bias here, right?
Right. You would assume. And so that's all what I mean by like the umpires are going to be shown in a worse light here. Maybe. And I mean, it's going to be, and this will happen next year if they bring it in. There are going to be games where like 10 consecutive challenges are correct, like overturned. The players are correct. The umpire will have gone 0 for 10. Like that will happen. I mean, even if it's flipping coins, you'll get 10 heads in a row. And that's going to be very entertaining from a broadcast or viewership standpoint, where it's like, oh, this umpire has been challenged 10 times and all 10 of them have been wrong calls.
Right.
And then does that humble the umpire enough to like, or will they freak out? Like, will that have the opposite effect where they get real touchy about this stuff?
Right.
I don't know, something to watch. Before we get into the 7 thoughts or 7 things we've learned, let's talk about our first sponsor is Blackstack. They're our presenting sponsor.
Yes, and they are widely distributed across Minnesota right now, but they are not widely distributed in Florida. So I miss them very much. They've got some decent IPAs in Florida. There's a couple that Phil and I will regularly try and find at various places, but they don't have local 755. I mean, they don't have pull tabs. They don't have a. They don't have their. I personally miss the Slopes French Pilsner. It's one of the nicer things that has happened in the last 12 months, I guess, is that Black Stack is now available in more than just its own tap room, which is a great tap room, and I think we'll probably try and do an event there soon. But more than just at their tap room and the specialty kind of beer stores that are out there. Now it is available everywhere. And I just have to tell you, if you have not gone out and sought them and found them, I think you should, because if you like beer, like if you recognize, oh, this beer is better than that beer, I think you're going to recognize that when you try Black Stack Brewing. So what I would do is, check out your local liquor store, see if you can find them. If not, make sure and ask for them. And otherwise, just stop by Black Stack Brewing near 94 and 280, or even easier, just ask for them at your local liquor store to make sure that you get it in your hands.
Our second sponsor is Factor Meals. We've both tried these, and they're good. The idea is
I've leaned on them lately, to be honest with you. When we were back in town, we were trying to also lose some weight, and the beautiful thing about Factor and their meals is that, they check all the boxes, right? They are healthy, right? They've got all kinds of different types of meals that you can get. You can get keto meals, you can get low carb meals. There's a bunch of different ones that you can kind of go for. But on top of that, they're super easy to make. You just pop them in the microwave. They're delivered right to your door, and they're really tasty. And one of the reasons that helps, especially with kind of weight loss things, is that if you've ever tried to do a diet, it's, you can be good 3 out of 4 days, and then that fourth day comes and you're like, I just don't have the energy to figure out how to do something. I'm just going to tuck into a big bowl of mac and cheese, right? And now instead you've got this Factor meal sitting in your fridge, and all you have to do is microwave. It couldn't be easier, and it's tasty, and it keeps you on track. And that's why I'm such a big fan of Factor meals. So.
You can eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/Factor Podcast, and then you use the code Factor Podcast, and if you do that, you get 50% off your first box, and they'll throw in free shipping. That's the code Factor, Factor Podcast, Factor Podcast at factormeals.com/Factor Podcast to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Okay, let's go through some of the Twins things. I would say the number one thing, especially because our last episode occurred before they signed Ty France, but
right.
So let's start with that.
One, yeah.
These aren't revelatory things necessarily because it's just the first week of camp, but these are the things, like if someone said, what I miss in the first week of camp, these are the sorts of things I would go, oh, we heard this. So let's start here. Ty France signs a non-guaranteed $1 million deal with them right just before the start of camp. People probably know him. I mean, he played a long time for the Mariners. He was an all-star in 2022. Been a pretty solid hitter for 4 or 5 years. Had a down year last year, in part because he got hit in the foot by a pitch in June and fractured hairline fracture in his right heel, and his numbers just fell off a cliff at that point, defensively, offensively, everything. So the hope is that the overall numbers aren't representative of what his talent level is now at age 30 because they were affected by the injury, which he's now over. Stylistically, I mean, we did a whole episode reacting in real time to the signing, so we're not going to talk that much about France specifically, but it feels to me like similar to how Harrison Bader we kind of described as Michael A. Taylor 2.0, the idea behind the signing. I would say that Ty France is stylistically similar to Donovan Solano. Right. They want who was $2 million a couple years ago, actually signed in the middle of spring training. And at the time, it was like, this guy's going to play first base and DH. He doesn't have that much power. He's older, only $2 million. He had a 110 OPS plus. He played solid defense. He was a very usable bat at first base and DH, which is really all there. I mean, anytime you sign a guy for $1 million non-guaranteed, all you're hoping for is competence, right? I mean, they're not hoping for an all-star comeback season. If you get that, then that's a brilliant signing. But they're just hoping for averageness. And averageness at first base last year was a 107 OPS plus league wide, which means 7% better than an average hitter, which makes sense because you don't put bad hitters at first base very often.
Right.
Carlos Santana, who was the Twins starting first baseman, who signed for $5 million around this time last year, a little earlier, had a 109 OPS plus, which means he was 9% better and slightly above average even at first base. That range of outcomes, a 105 to 110 OPS plus, if they could get that from Ty France, that would be a great signing for $1 million.
Yeah, of course.
Now, the impact would be somewhat limited, similar to Solano, but he would be a good piece. But the news element, the reason I wanted to talk about this is that you guys asked Baldelli, like day one, talk about the new guy, essentially, and what do you have planned for France? And he made it, in my mind, very clear that despite the non-guaranteed element of France's contract, Baldelli is surely planning on him being on the opening day roster. And beyond that, Baldelli's quote was, one of them was, quote, "This isn't a platoon situation. He's going to play." And then he also said of France's defense, which he's not really known for his defense, but he said, quote, "France will stabilize us at first base," and then also, quote, "very good with the glove."
Right.
Now, I'm here to tell you that nobody's really ever suggested that's the case with Ty France. As far as I'm concerned, the numbers don't really bear that out.
Ty France thinks so.
Oh, okay. Great.
We found out that Ty France thinks that the metrics screw him a little bit, that he's better than that with the glove. We found that out.
Of course. Imagine he said, I think I'm worse than even the metrics show.
Yeah.
But I'm willing to go along with that from Baldelli, in part because, like I said, the heel injury clearly affected him defensively as well last year.
Sure.
But even before that, he's been, average at best in terms of numbers, and I think reputationally too. Nobody ever thinks of him as like a Gold Glove candidate. However, the other reason I'm willing to at least go along with that for a while is last year at this time, we were sitting in Baldelli's office, and he was going on and on about how amazing Carlos Santana is defensively. And I will say Santana typically had not only good numbers, but a very good reputation. However, he had never won a Gold Glove, and he was 38 years old. But Baldelli was just hammering home the point last spring of this guy is awesome defensively. And we saw him look pretty good in spring training. And then once the season started, we saw he was phenomenal. Won his first Gold Glove at age 38. I haven't seen a better Twins first baseman since Minkiewicz 20 years ago. And so I'm willing to maybe see if Baldelli can duplicate that or replicate that, at which point I suppose I'll call him the first base whisperer, that maybe he's able to see through some of the metrics and see this stuff. But, they don't need him to be Carlos Santana at first base. They just need Ty France to be competent at first base.
But there's
particularly when the alternatives are Jose Miranda and Ed Julian, who I don't think anybody thinks will be average at first base.
Well, the surprising part about the conversation with Rocco, or the part that took us a little off guard, was just how definitive he was about Ty France. He didn't say, "Hey, Ty France is my everyday first baseman." He basically said, the quote was something like, "We've got three guys that you want in the lineup absolutely every day, Buxton, Correa, and Lewis. And then after that, we've got a whole bunch of guys who are going to get a lot of playing time. And Ty France is one of those guys," which makes him sound like, he is, and like you said, it's not a platoon situation, right? So that puts him somewhere between, somewhere between full time, but also, more than 1/3 of the time, which is where a right-hander would probably be if he was facing only the left-handers out there. So
but here's the thing about that. Yeah, his comments are interesting. That's why we're talking about it. But two things. One, Ty France is a right-handed hitter, but has never had pronounced platoon splits
that's true too.
in his career.
You're right.
He's not a guy who crushes lefties. He's a guy who's slightly better against lefties than righties, which is true of every right-handed hitter for the most part. But he's not a guy who, hits 240 against righties and 300 against lefties. There are guys like that, and they get platooned most of the time. He's more of kind of a neutral platoon split. So to sign him and then ask him to platoon isn't really necessarily playing to his strengths, or it's not fully kind of taking advantage of his skill set. But here's the other thing. Who the hell is he going to platoon with? They don't have a left-handed bat unless it's Eddie Julian.
Yeah.
I mean,
who, by the way, we asked a couple days ago and said he's not right now taking fielding at first base. He's
we're going to get to
second base.
We'll get to this as my second note, which is about the infield a little bit more. But yeah, he's in the competition for second base. Right. But if Alex Kirilloff were still in the mix here and hadn't retired, let's say, in the first base DH mix, then maybe you say, okay, well, it makes sense. Alex Kirilloff is a left-handed hitter. He's always been much, much better against righties and struggled against lefties. You bring in a Ty France, you pair him with Alex Kirilloff. Kirilloff plays against the righties. Ty France plays against the lefties. Well, Kirilloff's out of the picture. They don't have another left-handed bat at first base unless it's going to be Julian or like Mickey Gasper, who's a switch hitter.
Or Mike Ford, who I talked to the other day. Mike Ford, I specifically, it's funny because what you just said was almost a quote from Mike Ford. Like Mike Ford took a look at the situation here and said, well, they lost Santana and they lost Kirilloff. He said, I've been looking at this organization for a long time, and they always had left-handed bats in the corners. Now they don't really have a lot of left-handed bats in the corners. So, yeah, I signed your minor league contract to come here. Like I've been ended the year last year in Japan. Of course, I want to be someplace that there's a real opportunity, and this has got an opportunity for a left-handed corner infielder. So,
yeah, well, I'll say it's good you talked to him already because I don't know that you're gonna have that many chances. But but yeah, so. Baldelli's comments on France, I take more to mean to have an impact on how I perceived his chances of making the team, not so much his role if he does make the team, because you can look at the personnel and determine what a guy's role is. And so it more just clarified that. But I mean, here was my reaction, I guess, to hearing Baldelli talk up Ty France as if this was 3 years ago, Ty France.
Right, yeah.
Which is clearly what they're hoping for. And it should be noted, by the way, when they signed Carlos Santana, he was coming off 4 consecutive, like his worst 4-year stretch. Like he had barely been even an average hitter, and he was 37 years old. And so they got him turned around. They, were optimistic, and it paid off. But the only thing when I hear people talk, he's going to make the team, he's going to play, we think he's a really good all-around hitter, and stylistically, we like that he uses the whole field. That's all true of Ty France 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and I'm not saying it can't be true of him again. He's only 30.
Sure.
And he's got the injury as a potential reason for last year's struggles. However, I don't want to be a jerk here, but if they truly believed there was a high likelihood of all these things being true, they wouldn't have waited until February to give him a non-guaranteed $1 million contract. They would have just given him $3 million a month and a half ago. Right. Because you're waiting, somebody could have just swooped in it every time and given him $1 million and gotten him. So, and also, if first base itself was truly a high importance spot to fill, and we spent the last 3 months kind of talking about Jose Miranda as the default first baseman because they didn't have anybody else on the depth chart to challenge him. France obviously changes that. However, if it really they viewed as like we need to bring somebody in, we don't trust Miranda to take that job, which I would say there's some evidence of that now, that's how they feel. If they really felt it was that important, would they have waited until mid-February for $1 million, or would they have actually gone out and filled it? So that doesn't mean France can't be a good pickup. It doesn't mean they can't be optimistic and be truthful about all this stuff. But, you got to kind of also step back and go, okay, but why the non-guaranteed deal then?
Right.
Why not just give him $1 million? Why make him earn the spot on the opening day roster if the plan is to put him on the opening day roster anyway? I'm not saying these are negative things. I'm just saying keep that in mind as you hear people gassing up Ty France and the entire notion of Ty France. But I have no problem with the signing. First of all, for $1 million, he barely has to do anything to be worth that.
Right.
But that's not the real.
You don't judge it based on the
right.
What you base it on is there was an opportunity for something,
correct,
a significantly bigger move there, and they ended up with $1 million stuff, and that's based on the handcuffs that was placed on them from a payroll situation for most of the offseason. So,
well, sort of, yeah. I mean, they did spend $9 million in the week before that on some players.
I get, but it was the week beforehand when I don't know exactly who I guess they could have gotten, Canna or somebody as a right-handed bat, but
Justin Turner signed.
I guess Turner. Yeah. How much did he sign for?
5, I think 6, maybe something like that.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it's a reasonable bounce back bet. Ty France was a legitimately good hitter. He's not like a slugging first baseman by any means, but if he can give you a 108 OPS plus
Sure.
for 400 at bats and play competent defense and do some pinch hitting, I have no problem with that signing. But yeah, like you said, I mean, there's the cost, which is $1 million. I mean, if he's functional, it's worth $1 million. I mean, $1 million's the minimum salary essentially, but it's the opportunity cost, which is two versions of that. One, like we just mentioned, what other first baseman could you have signed or even traded for? But then the opportunity cost is also you're blocking Miranda,
Right.
Gasper, Julian, Mike Ford, your new friend, et cetera, which is okay. I'm not that concerned because I do think the reaction that a lot of fans seem to have had, and maybe this is partly the result of spending 4 months with Miranda sitting atop the depth chart.
Right.
And if you were to ask these fans in November, are you comfortable, 5 months from now, starting the season with Miranda as your starting first baseman? They probably said, no, not really. I would, but if you sit with that for 3 or 4 months and you talk yourself into it and you start to see the upside in it, because there is upside in Jose Miranda, and you start to go, okay, well, it gives him a chance and blah, blah, blah. And then they change it at the last minute. I did see, and we were asked a lot, why do they want to block someone like Miranda with a reclamation project 30-year-old? And I get that mentality. I just don't think this blocks Miranda from anything.
Yeah,
I think this does put more of an onus on Miranda to go earn the job and go take the job. But first of all, France is not going to start 162 games at first base. So there's going to be opportunities for Miranda at first base. The DH spot is wide open. If Miranda wants to start hot and hit and have a good spring, believe me, they will find at-bats for him in the DH spot. And then the other thing is Miranda's going to play plenty of third base because Royce Lewis is not going to play 162 games at first base either. Royce Lewis is going to be injured like he always is at some point. And even if he's not, they're going to use him at DH frequently, multiple times per week, I would guess. And Miranda can be the backup option at third base. And so does this block, quote unquote, block Jose Miranda from being the opening day starting first baseman? Yeah, probably.
But I mean, if he can't clear the hurdle of Ty France, then do you want him as your first baseman?
Or do you want him as your DH or backup third base? Like there is nothing stopping Jose Miranda from getting 500 at bats this year if he warrants 500 at bats this year. And I think they would love for that to happen. But what they didn't want to happen, I think what they didn't want to happen is him at first base defensively every day. But also what they didn't want to happen is if Miranda slumps or he gets hurt like he has 3 of the last 3 years really, to be left with, no offense to your friend, Mike Ford or, Mickey Gasper. They wanted a veteran competence, Donovan Solano type as the first line of defense on that. So I have no problem with the move. It's not he's not who I would have signed probably. I mean, we've talked endlessly about right-handed bats and all that sort of thing throughout the offseason, the names that we would have maybe gone after. But I'm not worried, and I'm one of the play the kids guys, first of all. Been that way 20 years. But Miranda isn't really a kid at this point. This is his 4th season. He's 26, 27, and I just don't think this meaningfully blocks him from earning time. This blocks him from being handed a job, but I don't know that they were going to hand him a job anyway. So
when in the exact same interview where Rocco was being asked about Ty France and gassing him up, as you like to put it, I like that phrase. We did finish the interview by saying, what about Jose Miranda? Like, he's still on the team. Let me give you his quotes quick, because I think we're going to reference them in the very next point. Yeah, Jose had a good offensive year last year overall. He's going to prepare at first base. He's going to prepare at third base. He's probably going to get some at-bats at the DH spot. He's going to find his at-bats slightly in different places. But Jose is going to be in a position where he's going to go out there, earn his at-bats, earn his opportunities like many other guys on our roster. You could probably turn to 2 or 3 or 4 other players who have done some good things at the major league level and ask a similar question, and it would make sense.
Right. Which I agree with that.
And I will use that.
The reality is they have a lot of promising 25 to 28-year-old young major leaguers, or relatively young in their major league career. And overall, a lot of them have pretty good numbers, but most of them were either injured or terrible for the final 2 months of last season. Mm-hmm. And in Miranda's case, he was also injured for the previous year and terrible, and then 2 years ago ended the season on a slump because of some health issues. So I think if that's one of the reactions to the way thing ended last season for this team, which is to say, if you're under 30, you're not being handed anything at this point. Now, I would say, because I'm one of those play the kids guys, I don't have any problem with making the kind of young major league former prospects earn it. But I guess the counter to that would be, I want to also see them make the veterans earn it. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean Correa and Buxton and that type of thing, but I mean Ty France,
right?
And I mean Harrison Bader. I don't want
if it's a competition, make sure it's a fair competition.
Correct. And I don't even mean
I'm with you
for like the roster spot, but throughout the year when you're deciding who plays, I don't want them to give more of a rope or leeway to a slow starting Ty France than they would have with a slow starting Jose Miranda or something.
And the reality is that we've seen this organization do that. Now, there is a reason for that. The reason for that is that the guys who are on a major league contract and don't have options can't be sent down, right? And you are hurting your depth if you're doing that. But
for $1 million contract, you can just say goodbye.
Potentially, yeah.
Right.
So that is a good transition, though, to your second point, I think, which is going to be covering what we know about at second base and who we know is not going to be playing there and who might be.
Right. So the second thing we've learned, first thing I guess I would classify as Rocco Baldelli likes Ty France. The second thing is, after quite a bit of talk in the second half of last season and then at the beginning of the offseason about, and actually beyond talk, Royce Lewis played second base for the Twins a couple of times last year, about Lewis getting comfortable at second base in addition to third base. It appears that experiment is basically over before it started. Now, Baldelli, I think you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but what he basically said was Royce is a third baseman. He's going to stick to third base. He's maybe going to get a few reps at second base just to kind of keep that muscle memory alive in case we need it for whatever reason. But it's not going to be a situation like they were kind of talking about in November, let's say, where it was like, we're going to work out Royce at second base and we're going to figure out, is he better at second base or third base? And it's also Brooks Lee is part of that equation too, because they have two guys who I think skill set wise can play third or second. They need to determine, I mean, first of all,
and they also have a couple of other folks that you could plug into either place as well. Miranda at third, Julian at second as well. Like that'd be another thing, right? Yeah.
Exactly. But it's the simplistic way to do it is like, where do we think Royce Lewis is best, and where do we think Brooks Lee is best? And that's great if those are two different positions. But if the answer is third base for both of them, let's say, then you have to say it doesn't matter so much where is each individual guy best. It matters what is the best alignment of those two. Like if they're both best at third base, but Lee is actually better at second base by a wider margin, then maybe it makes sense to play Lee at second base, which I think would be the plan probably, and Lewis at third base. But the bigger picture is, I guess Royce kind of got his wish, which is I'd like to stay at third base. And that's probably part of it. It's very clear he preferred to stay at third base, even though certainly at the beginning of the offseason, he was saying and doing all the right things about I'll do wherever, whatever. But to your point then, if Royce Lewis now is just staying at third base, which I think will be the case, and DH some, that makes second base, in my mind, the only true competition for a starting type of job that the Twins have in camp. I mean, there's competition for maybe the fifth starter, which that's one of my items here coming up. There's always competition for bench spots. There's maybe competition for a last spot in the bullpen. There's competition for platoon spots. But if you're talking about a 600 at bat or 600 plate appearance role, second base is it, right? I mean, and so you mentioned Julian is in the mix and he's playing mostly second base in camp. Brooks Lee, I'm of the belief that they want Brooks Lee to win that job.
I agree with you, although I don't have any quotes to do that. That would make sense to me. How about that?
Yes. But similar to the Miranda discussion, and Brooks Lee is young. He's 23, and he's only got 50 games in the majors. And by the way, most of them were not good. He was injured and ineffective basically after the first week he played last year. Yeah. Although not defensively, he looked good defensively, but he had back problems, shoulder problems. He hit 180 over his last 40 games or whatever. They're not going to hand him anything. And I don't think he deserves to be handed anything.
And
I'm a believer in him.
And he doesn't think he's going to be handed anything for what it's worth. Right.
So Lee versus Julian versus probably Willie Castro also in that mix.
Yes.
As the way I would view Castro in the second base mix is if Brooks Lee doesn't go out there and take the job and Eddie Julian doesn't go out there and take the job, then it's going to be Willie Castro's job. Because at the very least they know we can just put Willie there for a month or whatever it is. But that takes away from Castro's versatility and ability to fill in elsewhere and all that. So they would probably prefer not to do that. But I think the best case scenario for everyone involved is Brooks Lee looks great in camp. Offensively, defensively, health-wise, he's doing all the right things. He's impressing people, which was starting to happen last year in camp before his back problems.
Right.
I mean, he's an impressive player. He's not only a very talented young player, but he's smart, and he behaves in a manner that leads you to believe he's going to be a major leaguer. Let's put it that way. I think they would love him to have a great camp, and a month from now, there's no real question. Of course, he's going to be the opening day second baseman. He's looked great. We want him. He's going to play that position hopefully for 10 years for us. But if he doesn't do that, I don't think they're going to hand him the job. I think, if anything, I would kind of err on the side of, because of the health problems last year and because he struggled so much after the first good week last year, send him to AAA for a month. Let him go crush AAA for a month. Let him play exclusively second base with maybe a little bit of shortstop thrown in. And if Julian can hold that job for however long he can hold it, great. If Willie Castro can, fill in for however long and be productive, great. We saw that last year a lot with Willie Castro at second base. But I do ultimately think this is Lee's job to lose, I guess.
Yeah, so Rocco's quotes were basically that, there's more than one person that could end up as a 600 at-bat guy in second base on that roster. Right. He's hoping somebody ends up doing that. But he also called out, there's not one guy like that. There's not even two guys like that. Like, we got more than that. So he's probably, I think he's kind of suggesting we've got those three, maybe some other dark horses like a Austin Martin or a Gasper or something like that, right?
Yeah, although it sounds like Martin is basically going to be out.
You're right. Yeah, so it is actually another thing we've learned. I don't know if we're going to cover that, but yeah, Austin Martin is going to be a center fielder or outfielder for a lot of this game. But the way he makes it sound, I don't know that those three are competing to see against each other to see who can man second base for this year. But I think they're all competing against a certain level to see whether or not they can manage second base. And you're right. I think the default option is Willie Castro, right? Which is like, if Lee doesn't have to beat out Castro, he doesn't have to beat out Julian. Both of them have to beat out whatever the idea is in Rocco's and the organization's mind of what a second baseman should be, right? That these guys look like they are ready to take it over.
They just have to look like the good, healthy versions of themselves, which neither of them did last year for the most part in the majors.
No, that's right.
So yeah, I have no problem with that, but I think that is the one spot to sort of watch. And like you were saying, it's not a three-way battle. Because look, I'll be the first one to sit here, and I know for a fact that the Twins believe this too. You should not be making decisions based on spring performances.
Sure, of course.
But I don't even think they're going to do that. Like, obviously, look, if Brooks Lee goes out there and hits 350 in 50 at bats, he's going to be the opening day second baseman. However, the difference between hitting 250 and 280 and whatever, these are meaningless. It's not we're just going to hand the job to whoever has the highest spring training OPS in 47 at bats of mixed competition or whatever. But what it really means is there's a lot more to look at if you're a coaching staff, or even if you're just John Bonus sitting there watching them go through workouts, than the 47 at bats. I mean, there are hundreds of opportunities during the course of spring training to impress that aren't, in a box score anywhere. Right. And so I think that's really going to be, if Brooks Lee looks like Brooks Lee, Like what they think Brooks Lee.
And or some specific things that they know that he needed to work on. Like, can he hit with power? Can he hit with authority? That's just putting the ball in play. Can Edward Julian handle off-speed pitches and, look less passive at the plate, get on top of those things a little more? Can Julian also field second base competently in a way? Like, we know what the warts are, right? To what extent are they showing off their, their highlights, and to what extent are they diminishing some of the things that they're going to be attacked on? So,
right. Well, and the other thing is, Castro, it will be needed other places, and so you do limit yourselves a little bit to just saying he's the second baseman. They did that at times last year for long stretches, but if you are entering the season like that, you still probably need like Julian on the roster, because there are going to be days when Castro's playing left field or center field or whatever it is. Like he's going to be needed.
Shortstop.
Yeah, or shortstop. Because
if Lee is another roster.
That's a good point. Yeah, if Lee is at AAA, then Castro is your backup shortstop. So you still would then need a second baseman.
Right.
Which okay. So that's the second thing. The third thing you think we've learned is Louie Varland, who's apparently going by Lewis, like St. Louis now. Although, as someone pointed out, that could still be pronounced Louis. Right?
So the French pronunciation of
Louie Varland.
We'll ask Edouard Julien how he pronounced Varland's new name. That'd be fun.
Please take a picture of the confused look on Julian's face when you ask him that. I would really love to see that.
Yeah.
He'll turn to whoever and go, "What's he asking me?"
Yeah.
Let's just call him L. Varland. There's not going to be some kind of official announcement on this, particularly early in camp, because they need to make sure that all the starting pitchers don't die of a dysentery on the Oregon Trail here. Like, they need to make sure that they can go the next 5 or 6 weeks with, Paddack and Lopez and Ryan and Ober and Simeon Woods Richardson and Festa and Zebby Matthews and fill in the blank with, Andrew Morris and all these guys, that they don't start dropping like flies. Because if they do start dropping like flies, what looks to be a strength of the team, which is starting pitching depth, in my opinion, we've seen that can evaporate in a second. You can go from, oh my God, we have so much starting pitching depth, we're going to have to send 2 or 3 of these good guys to AAA, to
we're calling up a guy who started the year at high A.
Right, exactly.
And he's going to get 10 starts.
I think Louie Varland's role or future is not tied to performance. I think it's just tied to their starting pitcher group not imploding during the next 6 weeks. But if they can avoid that, and even like one injury, let's say Paddack has a setback or something like that, I don't think this would affect it. Barring like 3 injured starting pitchers, I believe that the Twins have basically decided that Louie Varland is going to transition full-time to the bullpen this season. Now, the question to be answered then, assuming you make it to the end of camp with your starting depth intact enough that you don't want to mess around with Varland, you feel you're free and clear then to just put Varland in the role that you kind of envision him thriving in, which is bullpen, I think, at this point. I certainly feel that way. I think you probably feel that way. I know for a fact Rocco Baldelli feels that way. He hasn't been shy about that. So if you decide at the end of camp you no longer need Varland as starter depth, then you're free to move him to the bullpen. But then the question becomes, AAA bullpen or Major League bullpen? Now, he's gotten some looks in the Major League bullpen, obviously. And 2 years ago, he was really impressive. Last year, less so. But the raw stuff is hard to miss in the bullpen. I mean, he throws 99 or 100. The cutter is, 93, 94 instead of 91, 92. He's less reliant on some of the shaky off-speed stuff. He's maybe less reliant on some of the shaky command and all that. I'm a believer in him as a, late inning reliever, or at least a setup man type of reliever. But the question is, like, is there still something to bet? Is there a benefit for him to send him to AAA to begin this year and tell him, now you're a reliever? Like, you're not bouncing back and forth. You're not, staying stretched out.
Work on this.
Right. Spend 6 weeks pitching 1 inning at a time or 2 innings at a time, taking the day off and then pitching again. Because there's a lot that goes into, from a preparatory standpoint, workload is lesser, but it's also different. Like you have to be able to pitch back-to-back days. You have to be able to throw 20 pitches and come back a day later and throw another. Or do they just think he's already gotten his feet wet as a reliever in the majors? He's also made plenty of starts in the majors. It's not like he's going to be uncomfortable overall in the majors. Do we just say, nah, screw that. He's 27 years old at this point. He's already spent 2 or 3 years at AAA. Like, yeah, could he refine some things from the reliever lifestyle doing it at AAA? Yeah.
Sure.
But do we just want him in the bullpen, throwing max effort for 1 or 2 innings? That's kind of how I would lean. I think I would have no problem with them sending him to AAA and saying, get 20 good innings under your belt as a full-time reliever. But I think a lot of that also is going to depend on the health of the bullpen, because if everyone is healthy, and by everyone I mean no new injuries, but also Brock Stewart and Justin Topa healthy,
right.
You have 8 spots accounted for in an 8-man bullpen. Now, that doesn't mean you couldn't cut loose someone like Michael Tonkin, who only has $1 million contract, or you couldn't send Alcala back to AAA, or for that matter, Topa to AAA. But if there are no injury issues and no one just completely falls on their face from a performance standpoint in camp, there isn't like a clear path for Varland. But I think it's actually sort of similar to what I was saying about how the Twins view Brooks Lee at second base, which is I believe they would like Louie Varland to force the issue with a great camp, with an impressive, healthy camp, so that on March 25th...
They'd also like the rotation to be healthy enough so that they feel comfortable doing that, right?
For sure.
That's probably even a bigger one, yeah. Right.
But I think they would like to be sitting there on March 25th with the whiteboard of all the names, and they're trying to move around and thinking it through and say, he's just one of our best 5 relievers, let alone 8 relievers. Like, are we really messing around with a 27-year-old who's already spent hundreds of innings at AAA? Are we kind of outthinking ourselves by sending him there, which that would be bad news for Michael Tonkin or somebody like that? Or it could be a moot point because Brock Stewart, which we're going to talk about here in a moment, he's one of my other items, might not be ready to be 100% at the start of on opening day, in which case there's a spot for Varland or Justin Topa, same thing, or somebody strains a hamstring at the final week of camp.
Right.
But I think in general, not at the level of Lee, because he's not anywhere near the upside of Lee. I mean, Louie Varland is 4 years older than Brooks Lee, it should be noted.
Right, of course.
But I do think they would really love it if Louie Varland just threw smoke all spring, whatever the role is, made it very clear, like, I'm ready to go, hand me a job, and I think that would be a bullpen job. And I kind of would like to see that, because I think while guys like Michael Tonkin have value to a bullpen in terms of being able to throw multiple innings, durability, all that stuff, and he's competent reliever, major league reliever, I really think if you start the season with Varland in the bullpen, there's a real decent chance that by the All-Star break, he's just like working the 7th inning for you, or at least like a medium leverage consistently. So that's kind of how I view the Varland situation.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I think I'm. What percentage chance do you think there is that he's in St. Paul versus in the majors?
I mean, it's hard to say because I don't think it has to do with him as much as it has to do with health of other guys.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, that's probably the case, right? But I wouldn't be shocked if they, especially if it comes to the point of like, oh yeah, we got to put so and so on waivers, even Tonkin, that they would be like, yeah, we'll just stash him in St. Paul because we're going to have somebody hurt in a week. And then we'll call up Varland, something like that. But yeah, I mean, Rocco has not committed to it yet that he's going to be in the bullpen, but they're certainly,
and they won't. They won't.
They'll build him up as a starter. We'll probably see him. I will be interested to see next week when games start what role we see. At what point we see him coming in, whether or not he'll be starting a game for 2 innings or 3 innings, or whether or not we'll see him jumping in the middle.
I don't know if he'll start games, but I bet he throws multiple innings.
Okay, I think that's probably true. He'll probably get 2 innings in it for sure. So
okay, so that's L. Varland, Louie, Lewis, whatever. Louie.
Should we hit our sponsors?
Yes, before we move on to the next set of bullpen things, which I tried to avoid lumping into that one. Let's talk about our last couple of sponsors here. One of them right here is Hims. And if you guys were watching this video,
right,
which someday in the not so distant future you may be able to do,
we might be able to. You might be treated to our countenance.
our lack of
And our
follicles.
and our follically challenged lack of continence. Yeah, one of the ways that if you are also follically challenged, if you're also thinking about, maybe I want to do something about that, you don't have to. You don't have to go arrange an appointment or all this stuff. All you have to do is go to HIMSS. HIMSS is going to make it super easy for you to try and find out what all the. Just to learn more about it, like schedule something, see a doctor, find out what your options are. There's a lot of different hair treatments out there that now it's not just a one-time solution. HIMSS has got all kinds of stuff that they can do, and they can make it convenient and quality access to a range of hair loss treatments that work all from the comfort of your couch.
And here's what you got to do. You can start your free online visit today at hims.com. That's HIMS, hims.com/Gleeman for your personalized hair loss treatment options. That's hims.com/Gleeman. And we'll read this. Results vary based on studies of topical and oral minoxidil and finasteride. Prescription products require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if a prescription is appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for full details and important safety information. That's hims.com/Gleeman.
HIMS.com.
Look at you. Our last sponsor is Harry's Razors. Long time sponsor.
Yep.
If you got too much hair on your face, Harry's is the way to go.
That's right. Yeah, good pivot there. Even if you don't, even like me, you kind of look like you got a baby face, but your wife's like, yeah, you're scratchy. Why are you so scratchy all the time? I was scratchy for 10, 20 years until I discovered Harry's Razors. And what I discovered with Harry's Razors is that, you don't have to shave with a dull razor all the time, because it's a pain in the ass to get your razor replaced or to replace your razor. We always used to talk about how much fun it is to have a brand new razor that you use where it just glides across your face and makes your face super smooth. Well, now you can do that because Harry's Razors takes care of all of the hassles around razor buying, including, not to mention, providing really good razors, like 5 blades, German engine from a German factory, but they get delivered right to you. They're half the price of going to the store. You don't have to wait for somebody to unlock a case, and it's got this great packaging around it.
And if you would like to give them a try, they have sort of a starter set, right, which you get a 5-blade razor, which has a weighted handle, foaming shave gel, and then they toss in the travel cover, which we've both used this.
Yes.
And it's just $3 for all that, which is a $13 value. You get all that for $3 at harrys.com, HARRYS, harrys.com/Gleeman. Get the edge on your shave with Harry's. Get started with a $13 trial set for just $3 at harrys.com/Gleeman. That's harrys.com/Gleeman for the $3 trial set. Okay.
What do I get there? I forget.
What do you get?
Free trial set? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
got it. Thanks.
Don't you start with me, Jim. Don't start with me. Number 4 on the 7 list is, I'll start with Brock Stewart.
We're going to stay in the bullpen, are we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brock Stewart had shoulder surgery in August after missing a chunk of time for the second straight year. Was said to be, quote unquote, behind in camp, which is often the way they phrase it for a guy who's healthy, but just has been compromised in terms of a normal offseason to, build up. He's not rolling into camp having already thrown a ton on his own for the previous month or whatever. He's sort of, a week or two behind pitchers. But we saw pretty quickly in camp that he was throwing a normal bullpen session, the reviews of which seemed pretty positive or encouraging. And, that's just one of many boxes to check or hurdles to, cross. But good news, first week of camp, to see him just throwing off a mound, throwing normally. Nobody said, oh my God, he's throwing 76 miles an hour or anything like that. There's a long way to go before he would be ready for opening day, which is why in the Varland discussion, there's a decent chance that there is a spot for Varland, whether it's Stewart has to begin on the IL, Topa, some new injury that pops up for someone. But good news for Stewart, and I feel like because he was kind of out of sight, out of mind in the second half of last year. And for that matter, part of 2 years ago. I mean, he's had a ton of injuries throughout his career, including his Twins career. It's easy to forget just how awesome he's been when healthy for the Twins. I mean, on a per inning basis, he's been like one of the 5 best relievers in the history of the Minnesota Twins. He's just only thrown, 50 innings in 2 years and now is a question mark. But I mean, part of the reason that their bullpen projects so well on Fangraphs or Baseball Prospectus or whatever is that the projection systems aren't looking at his injury situation. They're only looking at how many innings has he thrown,
total numbers of stats he's put up. Right. Yeah.
Right. And so that's, can be misleading, but it can also just shine through with the point of, if he's healthy, he can be a phenomenal late inning reliever. He can be the best reliever on a lot of teams, maybe not on the Twins, but that speaks to the overall quality of their bullpen. And so the difference between a healthy Brock Stewart and a question mark Brock Stewart could be the difference. First of all, it could be the difference between Varland in the majors and Varland at AAA.
Sure.
But beyond that, it really could be the difference between a good bullpen and a great bullpen. Because, I mean, think of this. If you have Duran and Jax, 9th inning and 8th inning in some order, and you have Brock Stewart and Cole Sands pitching 7th and 8th inning,
right,
and then you still, by the way, get into like Danny Coulombe, Alcala, hopefully a healthy Topa, maybe Louie Varland as like just your middle relief or, close game, but you're trailing. I mean, that is not only quality, but it's quantity. And so I think the Brock Stewart shoulder watch is going to be not one of the most important things, because I think there's a decent chance that he begins the year on the IL, even if there isn't a major issue. It's just like he could use another 2 weeks or whatever.
Though for what it's worth, he thinks he's on track to be coming back.
Yeah.
For what it's worth.
Brock Stewart is a great pitcher and a real good guy, and he's smart, but Brock Stewart is like
an unreliable narrator on that, maybe.
Well, I use that for everyone, but he's one step below Tyler Mahle in the I feel fine department.
Okay.
Like, we've talked to Brock Stewart in the afternoon and had him say, I just threw a bullpen session. I feel great. I should be ready for a rehab assignment. And then by game time, the Twins announced that he's done for the year. Like, that's maybe a slight exaggeration, but that's good. I mean, I want him to feel good. That's the key, obviously. And that would be huge. The other
the other thing about one more thing on Stewart is, if they have the sort of depth that you just referenced, well, then you're that much less tempted to try and push him in situations like back-to-back days or something like that. Like, that is, while on the one hand, his health is tied to maybe Varland making the roster just from a numbers standpoint. In terms of, you've got some quality relievers, you've got some guys who can fill in for him. Well, maybe you don't need to pitch him in the 7th inning in back-to-back days anymore, because you've got him, and then you trust Varland to come in that 7th inning, or you trust Cole Sands to come in that 7th inning. You trust Justin Topa to come into that 7th inning. So,
right. No, I mean, I would say, even if you don't trust those guys, you're not going to see Brock Stewart.
Careful about. Yeah, right.
I mean, I think they've already done that the past 2 years, basically.
I mean they've definitely tried to be careful with him, no question.
Yeah. Also on the bullpen front, we'll lump this in as the number 4 item, but Duran showed up, what everyone is saying is noticeably lighter. Apparently 12 pounds lost, which, let's see. Well, I'm going to do the math on that. Hold on. As a large human myself.
5% off.
I'll be charitable here. Yeah, it's about 4.8%, I think, at most. But listen, I'd take that for myself. I could lose that. But the bigger thing to me, because here's the truth. Yeah, you want everybody to show up in the best shape of their life. It's a cliche for a reason. I've been so conditioned 20 years of writing about baseball, and many of those spent working for like Roto World, where we would have to write blurbs about every glowing quote about someone being in the best shape. You just learn that some emperor's new clothes involved. You know what I mean? Like, you just learn, you get desensitized to it to the point that you're like, who cares? But, and especially in this case, I don't think was any bigger than he was 2 years ago when he was throwing 105 miles an hour, right?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
it'd be one thing if he used to look like Griffin Jacks and now he looks like Joan Duran. And then you go, well, he's put on some weight, but he always looked like a, linebacker, basically. But
Rich Garces, is that the name I'm thinking of?
Yeah. El Guapo. His name was El Guapo. Yeah. Well, and by the way, you would also have to prove to me that being fat hurts a pitcher, because
that's true. Yeah,
I just saw CC Sabathia elected to the Hall of Fame. So, and so, but the bigger thing to me, and the biggest question I had about Duran coming off last season was, his overall performance slipped from amazing to just good, I would say. His velocity slipped from literally the hardest thrower ever to just a hard thrower. He lost, he was throwing 101, 102 instead of 103, 104, 105. And the strikeout rate dipped too, again, from amazing to just good. And I think you could not convince me those are not tied together, all those things.
Sure.
It was weirdly, I thought, dismissed by all parties as it was happening last year of, I would say to him or Baldelli or Pete Mackey or something like, what are your theories for why he can't throw 103, 104 anymore? And the reaction was always, well, who cares? He still throws hard. And I was like, well, yeah, okay. And so two things about camp that were interesting on that front. One is day one, he talked about it. Baldelli talked about it. I'm sure other people talked about it. And it turns out maybe that oblique injury I had in spring training last year that cost me the first month of the season, maybe I never quite got 100% from that, or it kept me from sort of everything locking into place in a way that you need.
I got a slow start based on it. Yeah, right.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, first bullpen session, reportedly hitting 99 miles an hour. Second bullpen session, which was a day or two ago, sounds like he cracked 100.
Yeah.
And I know people are going, well, aren't you complaining, or not complaining, but saying it was discouraging to see him at 101 last year? Well, yeah. If it's June and he's throwing 100, it's discouraging. If it's mid-February and you're already throwing 99 to 100, that's
a good sign.
Yeah, it's a good sign. So that's good for him. And then the other bullpen note is Matt Cantorino, who threw yesterday, or today maybe, this morning? I don't know. I saw a video. Dan posted a video.
Okay.
One of my, it was fond and then it became not fond memories last year of spring training right away was hearing kind of a buzz in that bullpen area down the left field line at Hammond during this time last year, basically, and going, who's that? What? And it was Matt Cantorino.
Yeah, right.
Back from Tommy John surgery, basically hadn't pitched for 2 years at that point, throwing 96. The catchers were going, ooh, that hurt. And the batters were standing in and going, oh, man. And he looked great, and he felt great, and he's a great guy to talk to because he has a really good perspective on kind of the struggles of injuries and keeping it in focus and life and all. He's also just a real interesting guy, smart guy. And then a few weeks later, shut down with a shoulder problem, ended up not pitching at all last year, and is now kind of repeating the process of coming back. He hasn't pitched in a game since 2022, like an actual regular season game, which was in the minors at AA. So, I'm not I don't want to make too much of the fact that he's healthy, because he was healthy, but the remarkable thing about Cantorino thus far is that he's had endless injuries and has come back from each of them with his raw stuff pretty much intact, which is to say high octane, mid to upper 90s with 2 good off-speed pitches that he can throw. The difference, though, and this kind of goes to the Varland discussion, it sounds like they've given up the ghost on him being a starter.
Yeah, they're gonna try and keep him as a reliever. Yeah, sounds like and
which
probably the next step. I mean, in some ways it's just, let's try something different. Clearly what we've been doing is not the case. Let's try and get something out of this. I mean, the other good sign about it is that he's always still on the 40-man roster. So that shows sort of the Twins continue to have faith, or continue to be enticed with his stuff so much that they're like, yeah, but maybe we just keep him. Maybe we let somebody else go and just keep him out there, because boy, what happens if we get this right?
I'll double down on that point, which is a good one. Not only has he remained on the 40-man roster now for 2 years while injured, they haven't even transferred him to the 60-day IL, even when he's out for the season, which would create an opening on the 40-man roster because they didn't want him collecting service time and moving closer to free agency. Well, that only matters if you envision a guy having a multi-year run with you where it matters.
Right.
So I would say that plays a part in it too. But yeah, I mean, when I wrote him up as a prospect last year, which he is technically still a prospect, he's never pitched, by the way, even at AAA. I said I think it's time to move him to the bullpen because the two ways guys get moved to the bullpen generally are you lack the depth of pitches to succeed as a starter, which is to say you got a good fastball, but you don't have a good off-speed pitch or a changeup or something like that. And the other way is injuries. Well, his pitch mix is a starter's pitch mix. I mean, you go back to when he was at Rice, he was a dominant college starter. He's put up crazy numbers in the minors in the brief windows when he's been healthy. I mean, he has a upper 90s fastball. He's got a couple of good off-speed pitches. I mean, he throws strikes. I mean, you look at him on a healthy, good day, and you go, that's a starting pitcher, maybe even a frontline starting pitcher. So that's not what would necessitate a move to the bullpen. But the move to the bullpen is just this guy cannot stay healthy enough to even test if he can be a starter. And so at some point, I think you just go, let's try to get him in a 50 or 60 inning role, similar to what we talked about with Brock Stewart, honestly, where it's like, no back-to-back days. He's never going to throw a second inning. You know, we're going to try to get him somewhere between 15 and 20 pitches per outing. If he's got some soreness, we shut him down, all that stuff. So I think they'll be very cautious with him. But the other thing is,
this is also how the Twins. The second one that you said there is also how the Twins ended with Duran in the bullpen. Right, Duran was somebody who has had trouble staying healthy as a starter. He's flashed 103 miles per hour, and everybody's like, he's got the pitches to be a starter. Yeah, but he's having trouble staying healthy. Let's put him in the bullpen. Oh, good Lord!
Exactly.
Right. So
no, it's true, and now people like you complain when he throws his starter pitch mix.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Media jackals. Can't take them anywhere.
No, absolutely not.
Least of all, Fort Myers, Florida. But here's the last thing on Cantorino. Definitely someone to root for. Because of his odd career path, because of the injuries, he's 27. He's hasn't pitched basically in 3 years. He has never thrown a pitch above Double-A, and even his Double-A, I think he only has like 30 innings at Double-A. He's been on the 40-man roster for multiple years already. Yes, he's a prospect in technicality, and he doesn't have experience, so yeah, he's a prospect. But I almost feel with him, use those bullets while they are in the gun.
Maybe.
And what I mean by that is, I'm not saying he needs to be in the opening day bullpen. I mean, he needs to prove on some level that he can perform.
Sure.
But what I mean is, he doesn't strike me as a guy that you need to go send to AAA for a year. Because all you're asking him to do is get injured again and wipe out all the optimism. To me, if you think he can get guys out today, let's get him in the majors as soon as possible because you don't know how long that's going to last. And also the idea of a normal developmental path for him, progression for him, that's already out the window anyway. He's been rehabbing for 4 years. He's older than all the guys at AAA. Could he benefit from, like I said with Varland, getting true experience as a AAA reliever? Yes. But if he can get guys out now, let's just use them. And I don't mean on opening day, but I mean if he goes to AAA and has a good 3 weeks, I would not be at all opposed to just, let's see if it works. Because if it doesn't work, I don't think it's ever going to work. Do you know what I mean at this point? Right. At least with the Twins. If he can't get it together physically, and I don't mean that as a pejoratively, obviously it's not his fault, but it's either you're getting to that sink or swim time, and I see limited benefit to having him kind of fire those bullets at AAA when we don't know when the next bullet, if that's going to be the last bullet. So that's kind of how I view.
So what number are we on here? What number was he his own number, or was that just sort of included?
That was number 4. So I got
okay.
3 left.
All right.
But they're minor ones.
If number 4 was all injury stuff, let me throw one more in there as a thing because it's a similar story to Cantorino, Connor Prelip. Right. Connor Prelip is a left-hander that they got. He was a supplemental pick. Was that right, or end of the first round pick?
Yeah.
Second round. Yeah.
Second round.
second round a couple years ago, left-hander that everybody thought was, and they got him that low. He was supposed to be a high upside guy, but they got him that low because he was coming off of Tommy John surgery, as I recall. And, before they really could get him going, he's been injured and went through more elbow problems, etc. Came back end of last year, looked really good for 10 relief appearances, I think, or maybe 10 starts. I don't really know what he was doing that last year. Whether
they were short outings. Let's put them that way.
Okay.
They weren't 5-inning outings. Yeah.
And showing now this is a left-hander who's throwing 98 miles per hour here at spring training. So,
and that's not his best pitch, by the way. His best pitch is a slider by all accounts.
So tuck that one while we are talking about guys who you may not have thought about but could impact a bullpen sometime in the 2025 season, as early as a left-hander who's throwing 90 miles per hour, who also has not been. Has he even been to Double-A yet? I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Might be somebody that could find their way to, and I mean, I heard that same thing suggested by Twins officials October of last year that, hey, don't forget that Connor Prelip is still in our organization, and he could be a left-handed reliever that could turn things around a lot too. So I'll just throw that in there with the other injury news.
This is a low bar because they don't have that many lefties in the organization.
Well, that helps too.
But I mean, he's so far above the rest of the lefties in terms of just raw stuff and potential to dominate. I think much like with Cantorino and sort of with Varland, like I certainly would move him to the bullpen at this point. Yeah, right. He has like you said, an electric fastball, a phenomenal slider, and a pretty good changeup. For a lefty, that's a starter's pitch mix. However, what are the odds he's going to be able to throw 150 innings in a season? Like, he hasn't thrown 150 innings since high school, basically, at this point. I don't even think that's an exaggeration. So, there's a scenario where it's, July, and you got Louie Varland, Matt Cantorino, and Connor Prelip in your bullpen. That could change what is already a high-powered group into something that could really be special, not just this year. Okay, let's go through a couple of these other ones. Number 4. 5. Yeah, thank you. That's why you're the math guy, John.
I was going to say, let's talk about Joan Duran. Oh, hold it.
Are you saying at Carlton they didn't double down on 4? They
did not double down. Yeah, we just moved right on to 5.
Okay, well,
it wasn't like you in 4th grade, just double downing on 4.
I wish I would have been held back. It would have helped me from a sports competition standpoint, I feel.
Yeah.
Be like, why does this guy in the junior high team have a full beard? Oh, he was held back in 4th grade a couple of times. Chris Paddack, who also was, by all accounts, healthy. Sounds like he was throwing 95 in some bullpen sessions.
I think he touched 96 in the live at-bats.
All right, I round down. So, here's what I'll say that was noteworthy about Paddack. One, that he's healthy because he sat out the entire second half last year. Although the feeling at the end of last year was if the Twins would have made a playoff run, or if there had been another 3 weeks in the regular season even, he probably could have come back as a reliever. He just kind of ran out of time at that point. Similar to Joe Ryan, actually, who's also healthy. But the thing I thought was more noteworthy was Baldelli early in camp, talking about the rotation, talking about Paddack, kind of lumped Lopez, Ryan, and Ober together as these are our front 3, rightfully, and then kind of treated Paddack, I would say, as the number 4 guy on his own, and then lumped in Simeon Woods Richardson, David Festa, Zebby Matthews by name or just by description as sort of competing for the last spot. And it's not surprising that a manager would kind of elevate the veteran and apply some earn-it pressure on the young guys, but I just feel like, I guess this is similar to what I was saying about Miranda in France. I don't want the young guy to necessarily be treated differently just because he's not a veteran.
Yeah.
What has Chris Paddack proven as a starter in the last 5 years, let alone since he's been with the Twins? I mean, put it this way. Simeon Woods Richardson, as a rookie, proved more as a starter than Chris Paddack has in 3 years with the Twins. And that's because of injuries. This is not attempting to denigrate Chris Paddack, who I think can be useful, but it is strange to be like, oh yeah, he's locked in. This guy's a rookie, who did well as a rookie through 140 innings, has to kind of go earn it. But maybe that's just meaningless semantics anyway, that both those spots are going to be not up for grabs, but somebody's going to have to. I mean, Paddack's going to have to look good and stay healthy. Simeon Woods Richardson's going to have to show that last year's strides are, he's going to be able to maintain those. But I do feel like we kind of spent the offseason treating Paddack as the fifth guy, maybe because there was so much trade speculation that we kind of thought if they do trade him, then Festa becomes the fifth guy. But it sounds like in reality, Paddack is being treated as the default fourth guy, which leaves the fifth spot for all the young guys to fight over, which includes Simeon Woods Richardson.
Yeah,
is that your impression of the?
That is my impression. I mean, just based, and we haven't dove into this, and we also haven't seen Paddack in any spring training games yet, right? Because they start tomorrow. Although I wouldn't be shocked if we see him tomorrow or Sunday. I think he is right now the default as the veteran, fourth person. I will be interested to see what we see when we see him on a mound, and we can see some StatCast data on him as to what his velocity is like. I'm going to be interested to see what his control is like in some of these situations. We don't have a great view of that when we're watching these live BP things. I wouldn't say I would say he's got that default position. I also wouldn't say it's impossible that he would lose that situation. But frankly, it's also not impossible that he isn't healthy by the time opening day hits. Like, he's had enough, back and forth. The interesting thing about him showing higher velocity in some of these things is that we saw some higher velocity from him last year on occasion, right? We didn't see it on a consistent basis. We'd see, I think his average fastball last year was 94 miles per hour, but it wasn't like they were all 94 miles per hour. It was like, some are 97 and some are 90, and so I will be interested to see from start to start here through spring. And he had an off season where he is a guy that his mantra is always going to be to work harder and do more. That's the kind of a philosophy he dives into. And so you get that sense this off season, and that should pay off early in spring training with some good readings and some good outings, etc. I'll just kind of be interested to see can he show a consistency through spring training that we did not see start to start last year. And second year off of Tommy John, you probably should be able to. I think Rocco actually even talked about Paddack's sort of inconsistency last year. Like first year after Tommy John, you're going to have ups and downs.
Yeah, but it wasn't his first year. He pitched in September the year before, and they intentionally delayed his return to starting so that he basically had like a second 6-month period. Now, I'm not saying that's not a factor. I'm just saying.
Right. I mean, Kenta Maeda did too, but we saw the same thing out of Kenta Maeda. Sort of start to start, things would vary a lot when he came back in that first year, first full year back from
this
Tommy
is also
John.
Paddack's second Tommy John surgery.
Well, you're right.
And there isn't that much data even on that, because there aren't that many guys who have had two. Because the problem with some of the guys who have had a second Tommy John surgery have been so old at the point they had it that they were already sort of on the decline of their career, because to have it, he's not even 30, so he's had two by 30. He had one when he was like 21 or something in the minors, I think. So that's tricky too. Maybe it's you make the guys fight for the fifth job. You you slot Paddack into the fourth spot, and then you figure, what are the odds of Paddack having a healthy season anyway?
Maybe.
And so you ride him for however he can go. Last year, that was 17 kind of up and down mediocre starts, and then didn't pinch after the All-Star break. And if that happens again, then Festa jumps in, and then you're Simeon's number 4. But that's worth watching, because it does imply that Simeon Woods Richardson is competing for the fifth spot instead of being sort of the job is his to win. Again, maybe semantic.
Yeah.
But
I feel like he's the default choice for the 5 spot, in the same way that I feel Paddack is the default choice for the 4th spot. I just would have thought maybe they were on more equal footing prior to this, but they are paying one of the guys $8.5 million, so
7.5.
Okay.
Look at you, John. John's got so many millions that he's. Okay, number 6. Harrison Bader, who signed a little bit before We talked about him on the
Speaking
last
of
show,
$8.5 million, no, $6.25 million. So,
there you go.
there you go.
When they signed here, we kind of talked about Bader as being Michael A. Taylor 2.0, but really just what the role was supposed to be for Michael A. Taylor 2 years ago. Because what the role ended up being for Michael A. Taylor was starting center fielder because Buxton never set foot in center field.
Right.
Well, Buxton's coming off one of his best, healthiest years. He played a lot of center field. By all accounts, early in camp, he's fully healthy. They're planning on him being whatever healthy is for Byron Buxton they're hoping for this year. So then if that's the case, Bader is your backup center fielder for days Buxton misses or days Buxton is at the DH spot. And then when Buxton is in center field, that frees up Bader to what we assumed would be, as a right-handed hitter, platoon option in left field or right field. Sounds like it will be left field, and then they'll mix and match in right field. But basically, when a tough lefty's on the mound, you remove either Larnach or Wallner from the lineup, and you throw Bader out there next to Buxton, which improves your defense significantly, and puts another right-handed bat out there. That's great. I don't think that's like he's much better suited to be a backup center fielder than he is a platoon corner guy.
Sure.
But as a kind of a dual role, he fills both competently. Last 3 years, he has a 7.05 OPS against lefties, and you toss in the good defense and the good speed, and that's acceptable.
Yeah, especially in target field, which has an enormous left field. It's just a big left field.
Yeah. So yeah. But I just mean like production. That's better than you would expect from Wallner or Larnach against lefties, certainly, once you factor in defense especially. But what's interesting is some of the early comments from Baldelli has certainly hammered home that he will be used that way for sure, in addition to backup center fielder. But there's also people reading between the lines and saying, we sure Baldelli's not just going to play him a decent amount against righties in left field?
Yeah.
By moving then presumably Larnach or Wallner to DH on those days, which again, that makes your defense a lot better. We're going to see that once in a while just because the day-to-day injury and availability of a major league season, guys play like that all the time. But if you end up playing Harrison Bader significant starts in left field against right-handed pitching, you've built a poor the construction of your roster is poor at that point. Last 3 years, a 621 OPS against right-handed pitching, which is not good. I mean, that's bad. That's 100 points worse than decent, basically.
Sure.
And the defense and speed makes up for that, but you're moving Larnach or Wallner to DH, and that improves the defense, and presumably that still keeps them in the lineup, obviously, which is important. I mean, I said this jokingly a few days ago, but I'll say it more seriously now. If there are regular instances of a right-handed opposing pitcher, Harrison Bader being in the starting lineup and either Wallner or Larnach not being in the starting lineup, that is a huge misfire by the Twins, both day-to-day decision-making and roster-wise. So I'm kind of giving them the benefit of the doubt and not thinking that will be – I think they're too smart to do that. But the kind of middle ground would be you play Bader in left against a righty. You move either Wallner or Larnach. One of them plays right field and one moves to DH, which is, again, fine. You've improved your defense and you keep them in the lineup. But what you're really then doing is you've replaced whoever could have been the DH with Harrison Bader's bat.
Right, but I mean, that is what it is, though. I mean, the fact that they went and got Tyler France out for $1 million to fill first base when they have really available at bats at either first base or DH or maybe both, heading into February, and the solution is Ty France. I mean, what you're really saying is Bader in left field, and the defense he brings in left field more valuable than, say, Jose Miranda at DH, right? I mean, that's ultimately it's going to be Miranda or France that are sacrificed by either Bader playing left field versus a right-hander, right?
Could be Eddie Julian sacrificed.
I mean, it could be, depending if Julian's on the team. Yeah, I mean, fair. Yeah, I mean,
at no point in the past 5 years has Harrison Bader been a good option playing against righties, and that's while being a good defensive center fielder.
Sure.
If you then make him a left fielder, I'm sure his defense is going to be great in left field, but also that's one ball a game basically, or two balls a game. I just it would seem like an odd thing to do with a 30-year-old Harrison Bader coming off a terrible second half and like a 3-year run of below average hitting, even by his standards, to go, we're actually going to play him in a corner, which he's really never done regularly, but that's fine. And we're going to play him not every day, but we're going to play him against lefties, sure, but also righties. It just seems like a very strange. But I mean, they did that. They did that with Margot at points last year too, and I was like, "What's the point of this, really?"
You are touching on the thought process on why I wanted to talk to Mike Ford the other day. That if you end up with the situation being we really could use a left-hander, so we don't have to have Bader running, facing right-handers. We could really use a left-hander at either first base or DH when we're facing right-handers. Gasper and Ford could potentially be the 13th man on that roster. That they could opt for a left-handed bat when they're facing right-handers at either first base or DH. Because right now they've got two right-handers. Julian. Well, it could be Julian, but I don't. I mean, I think the thought process on Julian is like, is he ready? Period. Like, rather than have him be a, halftime player at the majors, would they rather have him continue to develop as a full-time player to
what end? That'd be his third year in St. Paul. He's 20. Was he 26? Like, I don't know. Esser get off the pot at that point. I mean, if they don't think Julian is their best option as a left-handed bat against righties as a DH, if they're going with Mike Ford, who's like has no track record of success in the majors and is 30 whatever years old, and also has the stink of becoming John Bonus's friend on him recently. I just feel like that at that point, Julian's probably kind of out of the plans at that stage, which I'm not saying is impossible.
If it helps for him, he wasn't that friendly to me, so
good.
If that's a case for him,
talk to him again, and if he's downright mean to you, then I'll really become a fan.
We did get to talk about playing in Japan. That was fun. So,
okay, so yeah, I'm all for better defense in the corners. I mean, Wallner and Larnach are not good defenders, but I think you're getting a little too cute at the point where you're playing Harrison Bader against righties in left field semi-regularly, which again, they haven't said they're going to do that. I'm just sort of connecting dots here. But yeah, I mean, I'm not fully convinced that playing Harrison Bader against lefties in the corner is going to be all that fruitful.
Sure.
So,
well, fair point. Right.
So, okay. Last thing, number 7 out of 7. And you'll have to speak to this because I'm not there, but there was a lot written and some quotes and everything about how Baldelli has kind of changed the day-to-day structure of spring training, at least early on. And it sounds like the intention is to kind of have that carry over through the regular season too, which means like more on-field batting practice as opposed to hitting in the cage. It means more team-oriented or group-oriented drills. It means fewer, one-on-one or individual behind closed doors type of workouts and practice situations and reps. This goes back to a discussion we had on the last couple of Patreons, which is this is clearly in reaction to collapsing down the stretch as a team.
Yeah.
Because the reality is how they did things last year was no different than how they did things when they made the playoffs in 2023 or won 100 games in 2019 or, on and on. I mean, they've had success with this more often than not. But what we're seeing is just as you hear from Royce Lewis after a bad finish to the season where he says, I'm going to focus on being more athletic and flexible. And just as you hear from Chris Paddack after an injury season where he says, I used to not throw that much during the offseason. I'm going to throw a bunch this offseason, so I'm fully prepared. Whatever the other side of the coin is,
right?
When a player is injured or struggles or when a team collapses, you look to the other side of the coin and you do what is on the other side of the coin. And for Baldelli, the preferred side of the coin, or what has been his approach in past years, and there's been plenty of success with it, has been a more, laid-back environment. If you don't want to hit on the field, you can hit in the cages underneath. If you don't want to stand around and take infield, you can do personalized infield. If you don't want to, the timing of things, the structure of things. But because they had a collapse, you then turn the coin over and you say, the easiest thing to do is now to take the other approach, or at least trend more towards the other side, which is more structure, more group activity. Everybody hits on the field on and on and on. And I'm not necessarily against that, but I think it is a great example of something that I keep kind of pointing out, whether it's with individual players coming back off injury or struggles, or now on a team level. It's more often than not, the narrative the next spring after things go poorly is, I've changed the way I do things. I've lost weight. I throw more or I throw less. I'm not lifting weights. I'm focusing on flexibility, and it goes both ways on that regard. So I do kind of think, until proven otherwise, that this is just the team-wide or manager version of that, which is, oh my God, this was a mess last year. What's on the other side of that coin that I can sort of institute here? Not necessarily because I think it's needed or I think it's better, but it's different, and it can clean the slate a little bit, or wipe the slate clean a little bit.
Frankly, I don't have any problem with that philosophy. Like the idea that this didn't work. I don't see a reason to continue doing it that way. We'll try something different. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to work better, and I think it's, that maybe it's a danger, or maybe it's not a danger, but it just tends to happen, and it's sort of amusing that things are different the next year, and you give credit to that which you changed, which may or may not be that which deserves the credit, right? But I will say this, the team leader on this, first of all, I should say, I think most of the stuff we're talking about is position side.
Yeah,
I don't think there's much difference in how the pitchers are doing things.
Right.
I think this is mostly about position. I think you're seeing a little bit more, like you're probably seeing. I feel like I didn't track last year how many times there was a daily meeting for the pitchers, but there's been one every damn day this year, right?
No, but you're talking about the day-to-day grind of being a position player, the monotony, the routine of it. Right. We do the same crap every day. We hit, we field, they've changed that, is what the big seemingly.
It feels to me like whereas the pitching side had more structure in the past. Probably that's the nature of being on the pitching side, right? The hitting side didn't have as much structure overall as a team, and that structure is being added. And if you take a look at, the team leader on the position side, well, it's Correa. Well, does anybody like structure and grinding more than Carlos Correa? Hell no. Like, that's exactly what he likes to preach on a regular basis. So now you're aligned with a team leader on that. You've also got a new hitting coach and hitting team in place, and some new coaches on that side, some of whom are pretty enthusiastic, and it might very well adopt that as well. So it makes some sense in that way. So, you can also take a look at that collapse and say, a lot of the young players who ended up flailing didn't really have a lot to grab onto by that point. The veterans were hurt. They found themselves sliding downhill, and it would have been nice if there was more of a team mentality or leaning on the team, and instead they're trying to find their swing in a batting cage by themselves, and that's is that fair to them? So I don't know how much of that is logical or not logical, but what is logical is, if something didn't work, let's make some changes. And that change has been, in some ways, I actually, as Rocco was going through this discussion started a few days ago. Then we had Correa come to camp, and he talked about it, and then we followed up with Rocco about it, because we wanted to find out, we know that you're adding more structure or more team-oriented things to this camp, but let's unpack that a little bit, and we did. And midway through it, I just asked, so are you more of a taskmaster now? Like, he's always been viewed as sort of a player manager. And this question straight up was like, are you a taskmaster now? And his answer was like, that might be going a little far, but yeah, kind of. And that's okay. It feels good to be that guy.
Right. But I mean, that is exactly what I'm talking about, which is what you've been stopped working. just take the opposite approach.
Right.
And
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
I agree with all you're saying. I don't think there's like some inherent risk to it, but here's, I guess, what I would say. The reaction to this is going to be, why didn't they do this sooner?
Well, sure, probably.
Because it's all the stuff. Right. But here's the reality of it. The reason they didn't do it sooner is because deep down they don't think this is the best way to do it. Otherwise, they would have done it sooner. Now, maybe their opinion has changed on that because of last season. Right. But I will point this out. 2/3 of the way through last season, they had 90-something% playoff odds, and they were well on their way to 90-plus wins.
Right. Yeah,
that's right. It was working.
Right.
Do we think that the lack of structure...
And the year before, they made it to the ALDS.
Correct.
Right.
Do we think that the lack of structure worked and worked and worked and then completely fell apart for the last 6 weeks of last season and is now not viable as a way to do things? No, I'm not. I think that would be a silly thing. Now, that doesn't mean you can't flip to the other side of the coin and go with that for a while. But I just think the danger of it is that you are almost by definition now doing something you at least didn't used to think was the best way to do it. Now, maybe they were wrong. Maybe they've adjusted their opinion. But all I'm saying is throughout 2023 and for the first 2/3 of 2024, what they were doing worked pretty damn well.
Yeah, right.
And so, you know, like you said, there's no harm in making a change. Well, I will say that one of the great cliches that people talk about in sports or life is don't make a change for change's sake.
Sure, right. Yeah.
This is definitely an example.
Don't fix what ain't broke. Right.
Right. Now,
but it broke.
Right. It broke for 6 months after largely working for 5 years or certainly a year and a half. So I don't think there's any great danger. I have no problem with it. And there's certainly aspects of it that I do think will be good. But I just think it's such low-hanging fruit for people to go, finally, Rockhead isn't just going to let them stroll in whenever they want and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Well, that worked. Yeah. Like, why are we acting like that? By the way, there's no evidence that this works yet. We don't have any evidence of any kind on this. So it's an interesting storyline. I also, by the way, am fairly skeptical that this is something that will continue throughout a regular season. And what I mean by that is I've never seen Byron Buxton take batting practice outdoors at Target Field. And there are several other players who very rarely do so. If we get to July and I've seen that 50 times from Byron Buxton, then I will sit back and say, wow, they made a meaningful change. By the way, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's not like Byron Buxton is not taking batting practice. He just prefers to take it in a one-on-one environment against a pitching machine or a coach in the cages that they have indoors. They got, $1 million facilities indoors too. But I guess it's a very easy thing to say week 1 of spring training when there's 1 million guys in camp and you are doing things on your own. I will be very curious to see if this is something they really push for throughout the regular season, because good or bad, it will take guys out of their routine that largely they've had success with, by the way, for years now. So yeah, it's interesting. It's very clearly a response to 6 weeks as opposed to 6 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or 6 months. Or
although Rocco did call out, like, listen, we've been doing things the same way ever since I got here in 2019. It was the default way of doing things, right? And now they're going to try making some changes. And I mean, when you go through I'll overstate it by saying this word, but the trauma of what that team went through for the 6 to 7 weeks at the end of the season last year. Yeah, you probably better change something.
But my point is they didn't change anything.
No, maybe
it's the same team. You added 3 low-cost veterans, so now you're placing a lot of emphasis on sort of eyewash changes, as they say in baseball.
Yeah, maybe.
Which is we're going to take on-field BP. Was not taking on-field BP why they collapsed for 6 weeks down the stretch? Ooh, if it was, they should have fixed that a lot sooner. I guess all I would ask, and feel free to ask this, you can tell them I said it. Why didn't you take this approach at any point in the last 6 years? And we know the answer to that because they didn't think it was the best approach to take.
Well,
so what has changed to make you think it's the best approach to take? And if the only real answer to that is, did you see how terribly we played for the last 6 weeks of last season? That strikes me as like a kind of a specious argument. Like okay, I get it. You want to flip the coin and see what's on the other side of the coin. I'm not against that at all. But clearly this wasn't your sort of, and organizationally too, not the way you would kind of intend to do things if given a choice. Now, you feel motivated, and I think the truth probably is if you don't change the core of the roster, then you do have to make change for change's sake in the eyewash department. You know what I mean? Like if the talent involved is the same, it's more difficult to not change anything with how you're handling and managing that talent, because then at that point you've changed nothing. Then at that point you're just saying the last 6 weeks didn't mean anything in terms of how we view the overall talent. And so this is, I guess, a lower wattage or a easier to enact change than trading away 3 core players and signing this guy and signing that guy. It's, well, we actually didn't change the roster, but we're going to have them stand by each other more when they take ground balls before games.
Yeah, I mean, I think eyewash is overstating. I think you've got different people in the organization trying to do different things to try and avoid things like what happened last year, right? I don't know that. I think even if they would have made some significant changes, Rocco's still the one who's responsible for figuring out what spring training is going to look like and how the team ends up getting trained. And he may be implementing this either way. That has nothing to do with the fact that Falvey's hands were tied until February 1st on payroll and ended up not making any significant changes or couldn't find any way to make another significant change, right?
No, I guess what I'm saying on that,
it's not like they're dictating it to Rocco to say, "Hey, listen, we couldn't do anything, but you got to make it. You got to play up the PR aspect of making people hang out together."
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, at the end of last season, one of the things Baldelli said, and I think rightfully, is, I have to spend time and look in the mirror, just like we're asking the players who struggled, and I have to think about, how am I managing the team? How am I managing individuals? It can be as simple as routines, like we've talked about. He's now switching to just how I interact on a daily basis with each person and all that. And so it doesn't surprise me then that he spent the offseason, he comes in and he says, here's how I'm changing my approach to things. I just think it's putting a lot of pressure on that.
Yeah.
Because there isn't any other changes.
Right.
And so I just think that is not something that can maybe bear the weight of that pressure ultimately in terms of impact. I mean, we'll see. Like you said, one of the interesting things about just saying, we'll see what's on the other side of the coin, we'll take that approach. If you have success, then you can go, oh my God, it was a miracle. We started taking on-field BP, and what do you know? We were the best team in the American League. And if it doesn't work, nobody's going to blame that. Right. It's a free roll. Do you know what I mean? It can either work, correlation, causation, work, or it doesn't work, in which case the lack of changes to the roster is what's going to really be meaningfully blamed if they, play poorly again.
Well, and one of the things, listen, when any organization moves from, and I'll call it a sports thing, from players manager to taskmaster, right? But you see the same thing like in the military, from the general everybody loves to the general everybody hates, or whatever, right? Whenever any organization moves from that to one, the danger is people are all on board for the first week or two, and eventually the players are like, or the people who followed him before are like, this guy used to be a really good manager, now he's kind of an a-hole. Right. And they can start turning out. Now maybe that is the danger Rocco is probably facing if he is moving that direction, to what extent he is moving that direction. I do think it helps that he's got Correa as the team leader. Like, some of the team leaders are going to be, that Buxton is willing to buy in and take BP live, and that Correa is, absolutely the evangelist for more structure and more work and blah, blah, blah. I think that probably helps. So, I don't know. We'll see.
But I don't think doing things as a team and on the field means that there's more structure or more work. I think, if anything, some players and coaches would tell you that you're able to do more structured work with individual coaching behind the scenes, maybe, as opposed to waiting your turn to hit and having to stand there and watch another guy hit and cheer him on. And yeah, from a team building standpoint, that's great. I guess as you were saying that, like I don't disagree. I'm fine with what they're trying to do. I have no problem with it whatsoever.
Sure.
I ultimately think it's not important one way. It's not that important one way or the other,
Sure.
which is why I called it eyewash. It's just a thing to do, basically. And if it works, fine. If people like it, fine. But I guess as you were describing that and you're saying, as teams move from a player's manager to a disciplinarian, or, you got an army general. I didn't know you were in the army, John, but where, guy you hate, guy you like. It's not usually the same guy. That's kind of what I'm saying. Right. Is you didn't fire Rocco Baldelli and replace him with Bobby Knight.
Right.
You're relying on your laid-back
that's the danger,
player's manager to now do something that he clearly at least didn't used to think was the right approach. Now, maybe he's changed his stance on that. So it'll be interesting. I mean, it's one of those things you cannot quantify. There's zero way to quantify this.
Right. Yep.
And so if they play well, everyone's going to say, great, that worked.
Right. Yeah.
And if they play poorly, I don't think people will say that was a mistake.
Right.
I think people will just forget that they tried to change this, and then, you might bring in Bobby Knight. Is Bobby Knight dead?
I honestly don't know.
Yeah. Bobby, if you're listening, email. If we don't get an email from Bobby Knight, we'll assume he's dead. And if we do, I don't want to Google it because we're very late in the show.
All right.
All right. Thank you to our sponsors.
Harry's and Hims and Factor, and a very special thank you to our presenting sponsor, Black Stack Brewing. They're now all over Greater Minnesota. They're not in Florida yet, but you guys can still take advantage of it. So stop by your favorite liquor store or the Black Stack Tap Room and grab your favorite brew or try something new.
We will be back for our beloved Patreon subscribers either Sunday evening-ish or Monday morning.
Morning-ish, yeah. We're not sure which.
With what we believe to be a special guest.
We believe to be a special guest. We also be able to cover the first game of spring training and reflect on what we saw from the Twins versus the Braves tomorrow.
Any news or heartburn that occurs between now and then, we can obviously discuss.
We would love to have you join us.
Yes, Patreon, Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. And if you join and you listen to our most recent episode, you can hear us discuss at the beginning of that episode some of the changes we have planned structurally, eyewash and otherwise, much like Rocco Baldelli, to the podcast, the Patreon podcast itself. I'm
going to be much more of a taskmaster, try and keep Gleeman from going off on his own, recording podcasts with other people.
You're a player's manager.
I probably am a player's
Unfortunately, your version of Carlos Correa likes structure and yelling at people himself.
That's correct. All right. Thank you very much for listening. Otherwise, we'll talk to you Friday. Bye-bye.
Gleeman